The encounter that changed everything. A chilling morning in San Francisco. The air was sharp that morning in San Francisco, and the city's usual vibrancy felt muted under a heavy blanket of fog. People bustled along Market Street, their breath visible in the cold air, but nobody seemed to notice the figure slumped near the corner of 5th and Mission. She was nearly invisible, blending into the concrete. A middle-aged woman wrapped in multiple layers of worn clothing, her face hardened by the countless nights spent under the open sky. Her name was Emily Harper, a decorated Army veteran. Once, a proud soldier who had served her country with honor, Emily had fallen into destitution after a series of tragic events. An honorable discharge due to injury, the loss of her husband in a car accident, and a failed battle with PTSD that drove her away from family and friends. Eventually, she found herself on these streets day after day, ignored by the world. But today was different. Sundar's early morning walk, just a few blocks away, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, was wrapping up an early breakfast meeting with community leaders at a small, inconspicuous cafe. Though his schedule was always packed with high-stakes meetings and tech innovation briefings, Sundar had carved out time to personally discuss Google's philanthropic initiatives in addressing homelessness in the Bay Area, a growing crisis that had long troubled him. Unlike many in his position, Sundar believed deeply in personal involvement. Data and reports were useful, but real understanding, he felt, came from listening to people's stories directly. As his security team prepared the car, Sundar requested something unusual. "I'll walk to the office today, just 1 block, please stay back." Reluctantly, his bodyguards obliged, maintaining a respectful distance. The fateful meeting, as Sundar approached the crosswalk, his sharp eye caught Emily sitting against the wall. There was something hauntingly noble about her, even in her fragile state. Her back was straight, her eyes fierce, though obviously exhausted. A hand-painted sign sat on her lap. It read, "Veteran, mother, fighter, just need a chance." Most passers-by looked away, pretending not to see her. But Sundar couldn't. He stopped. "Good morning," Sundar said softly. Emily, surprised that someone actually addressed her, looked up warily. She assessed him quickly. Expensive but modest coat, kind face, no visible condescension. "Morning," she replied hoarsely. "I'm Sundar." A faint smile touched Emily's lips. "Nice to meet you, Sundar. I'm Emily." A simple conversation. Instead of offering money, Sundar sat down on the bench nearby. "May I sit here for a moment?" Emily nodded, cautiously curious. People in suits didn't sit on public benches to talk with the homeless, especially not CEOs. For the next half hour, they talked. Emily shared fragments of her life. Her 12 years in the Army, how she served 2 tours overseas, the accident that ended her husband's life, the relentless PTSD that clouded her days and nights, the shame she felt at burdening family members, the bureaucratic maze that failed her after her honorable service. Sundar listened intently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer unsolicited solutions. He simply let her tell her story, a simple act that had become increasingly rare. The turning point. When Emily paused to take a breath, Sundar finally spoke. "You've shown a strength many could never comprehend, Emily. The world needs to hear stories like yours, not as tragedies, but as reminders of resilience." Emily chuckled bitterly. "Resilience? That's generous. Most people just call me a lost cause." Sundar shook his head firmly. "You are not a lost cause. You are a human being who was failed by systems meant to protect you. But your story isn't over. If you're willing, I'd like to help." Emily's eyes narrowed. She'd heard similar words from countless well-meaning strangers who never followed through. "How?" she asked skeptically. "Let me show you," Sundar replied. The first act of kindness, Sundar called his office and arranged a ride for Emily. His team had already launched community initiatives to assist homeless veterans, but hearing Emily's story personalized the mission. He took Emily to a privately funded transitional facility that Google quietly supported, a place not just offering beds, but holistic care, medical attention, therapy, job placement, and emotional healing. Emily was hesitant but agreed to stay for 48 hours to test the waters. The seed of transformation. In those first 2 days, Emily received her first hot shower in weeks, proper medical care for her untreated ankle injury, and something even more valuable, human dignity. A compassionate counselor named Rebecca gently introduced Emily to therapy sessions that would address her PTSD without judgment. A nutritionist worked on stabilizing her diet. Volunteers helped her reconnect with her estranged younger sister in Ohio, someone who had been searching for her for years. Sundar visited the facility 3 days later to check on her progress. He arrived unannounced, dressed casually, and sat with Emily in the facility's garden. "I almost didn't stay," Emily admitted, her voice stronger. "But something told me this wasn't like the other shelters." "It isn't," Sundar said warmly, "because it's built on stories, like yours. The media gets wind." What began as a private act of kindness soon drew public attention when a volunteer posted an anonymous story on social media about a powerful CEO sitting on a bench, talking for an hour with a homeless veteran. Though Sundar never intended publicity, the post went viral. The media dubbed it, "The CEO and the Soldier, a Story of Compassion." People across the nation were captivated, not by Sundar's wealth, but by his humanity. The ripple effect begins. Emails flooded in from veterans, nonprofits, and even policymakers. Sundar seized the moment, organizing a roundtable discussion at Google headquarters. He invited veterans, therapists, housing advocates, and lawmakers to brainstorm real solutions. Emily, after some persuasion, agreed to speak at the event. Standing before cameras and politicians, she said, "I'm not here because Sundar Pichai rescued me. I'm here because someone finally listened. We can't solve homelessness with handouts. We solve it by seeing people, hearing them, and giving them tools to rebuild." The room erupted in a standing ovation. The awakening of a movement, a quiet storm, begins. The morning after the conference, Sundar sat quietly at his desk in Mountain View, reflecting on the event that had unfolded like a spark in dry grass. What had started as a spontaneous act of compassion was beginning to blossom into something far greater, a national conversation about how the most advanced society on earth could still leave its heroes forgotten on the streets. Emails and messages were still pouring in, not from media outlets seeking interviews, but from everyday people, veterans, social workers, and even CEOs of rival companies, inspired to act. Some offered funding, others offered buildings, job opportunities, and training programs, but most simply shared their own personal stories of homelessness, trauma, or redemption. Sundar realized something profound. This is bigger than Google. This is bigger than me. Emily struggled to trust. Meanwhile, back at the transitional facility, Emily Harper was navigating unfamiliar terrain. After so many years of numb survival, emotions were resurfacing: guilt, fear, hope. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her counselor, Rebecca, became her daily anchor. They talked for hours about the layers of grief and shame that had haunted Emily's nights. But Rebecca recognized something rare. Emily still had fire inside her. "You fought wars both overseas and inside your own mind," Rebecca told her one afternoon. "But you're not broken, Emily. You're evolving." Emily had never heard it put that way before. For years, she had internalized her homelessness as a personal failure. But with each conversation, her perspective shifted. The small victories. She reconnected with her younger sister Megan through video calls that started awkwardly, but slowly thawed into tearful laughter. She began attending weekly group therapy sessions with other homeless veterans who carried their own invisible scars. She started writing again, daily journal entries about her experiences, dreams, and reflections. Writing had once been her passion before life became about mere survival. Sundar visited often, always quietly, always respectfully. He never treated Emily like a project or a cause. He treated her like a person. A conversation that changed. Sundar too. One afternoon, Sundar and Emily sat together under a blossoming cherry tree in the facility's courtyard. The spring air was warm and sunlight danced through the petals. "You've taught me more than any leadership course ever could," Sundar confessed. Emily smiled, still getting used to receiving compliments. "How so?" "In tech, we talk about systems, data, and algorithms. But sitting here with you reminds me that every data point is a human being. We build AI to make life easier. But what about the people who've already fallen through the cracks? That's where we've failed." Emily's eyes welled up, not because of pity, but because someone finally understood. "If you really mean that," she said softly, "don't just fix my life, fix the system." Sundar nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "That's exactly what I intend to do." The launch of Project Second Wind 1 month later, Sundar unveiled something revolutionary. Project Second Wind, a bold initiative aimed at systematically addressing homelessness with an initial focus on homeless veterans. Public-private partnerships. Sundar partnered with multiple Fortune 500 companies, pooling resources for housing, mental health services, job training, and legal assistance. Technology for good. Google's AI would assist in identifying individuals at risk of homelessness and connect them with services before they hit the streets. Veteran-led counseling programs. Emily herself suggested that veterans be hired to counsel fellow veterans, creating a peer-to-peer network of trust. Policy advocacy. Sundar committed personal funds and Google lobbying efforts to advocate for more veteran protections at the legislative level. Unlike previous initiatives, this was not charity. It was reconstruction. Emily steps forward for Emily. The transformation wasn't just external. She was slowly becoming a symbol of resilience. With her counselor's encouragement, she agreed to publicly share her story at the official launch event for Project Second Wind. The event was held at Google's main campus, packed with journalists, world leaders, and philanthropists. As Emily stepped onto the stage, applause thundered around her. She looked momentarily overwhelmed but gathered her composure. Her speech was raw, powerful, and deeply moving. "I was trained to survive on battlefields, but no training prepared me for surviving alone on the streets of my own country. For years I felt invisible. But today I stand here, not as a victim, but as proof that no one is beyond saving, as long as someone chooses to see them." Her words echoed across social media, television, and news headlines. Millions were moved. A nation awakens. Suddenly, homelessness, often discussed in passing, became a front-page issue. Other tech giants followed Sundar's lead. Amazon, Microsoft, Salesforce, Apple, and many others pledged funding and infrastructure to create similar programs across the country. Mayors and governors requested Google's data to better target housing assistance programs. Universities started courses on ethical urban planning and homelessness prevention. Veterans who had lost hope volunteered to mentor others. Emily's story became the face of a revolution in how America treated its forgotten. The unexpected. Phone call one evening, Sundar received an unexpected call from the White House. The president, inspired by Project Second Wind's success, wanted Sundar to lead a national task force for homelessness eradication. "Your model works," the president said. "It doesn't just hand out food or beds, it builds futures." Sundar was humbled, but hesitant. He had responsibilities at Google, but also recognized the gravity of this moment. That night, he met with Emily at the facility. She had become not just an inspiration, but his confidant. "What should I do?" he asked her sincerely. Emily paused before replying, her voice steady. "You once sat on a cold bench to hear my story. Now millions are waiting for someone to hear theirs. If not you, then who?" The burden of leadership. Sundar accepted the appointment under one condition: that his efforts remain bipartisan, humane, and entirely data-driven, focused solely on outcomes, not politics. He assembled a task force of unlikely allies: former homeless veterans, tech engineers, economists, mental health advocates, faith leaders, lawmakers from both parties. Emily joined as one of the board's advisors. Challenges. Ahead, the task was enormous. untangling years of broken bureaucracy, navigating entrenched political interests, balancing short-term relief with long-term solutions, and perhaps most difficult, shifting public perception from blame to empathy. But momentum was on their side. Sundar often reminded his team, "We're not here to save people. We're here to create a world where they don't need saving." A personal milestone, as months turned into a year, Emily achieved a personal victory she never imagined. She published her first book, Invisible No More, A Soldier's Journey, From the Streets to the Stage, which quickly became a bestseller. Her story inspired countless veterans to step forward and seek help. Book signings often turned into tearful reunions and counseling sessions. At one such event, a young homeless veteran named Marcus approached her, eyes wide with both fear and hope. "Your story saved my life," he whispered. Emily hugged him, remembering the bench where it had all begun. "No, Marcus, you saved your own life. You just needed someone to remind you." The struggle beneath the spotlight. The quiet cost of fame. As Emily's story gained national attention, her life became both extraordinary and complicated. She was no longer just a homeless veteran. She was now a symbol of resilience, a best-selling author and an advisor to a national task force. But with that recognition came an overwhelming spotlight. Interviews on major talk shows, invitations to keynote conferences, messages from veterans across the country, desperate for hope. Emily often felt the weight of expectation crushing her. Behind the calm smile she offered on camera, she still fought nightly battles with PTSD, nightmares that transported her back to war zones, to cold streets, to moments of unbearable loss. Her counselor, Rebecca, remained her grounding force. "You're carrying more than your story, Emily," Rebecca reminded her one evening. "You're carrying the stories of thousands." Emily nodded, tears welling. "And I don't want to let them down." The growing movement. Meanwhile, Project Second Wind was spreading across the country faster than anyone had predicted. In Detroit, abandoned factories were being converted into community housing centers for veterans. In Texas, partnerships with oil companies created thousands of job opportunities for retrained veterans. In New York, mental health facilities focused on trauma-informed care for female veterans, inspired by Emily's advocacy. The program was being hailed as one of the most effective public-private partnerships in recent history. Homelessness rates among veterans began to drop for the first time in decades. Even rival tech CEOs, once focused solely on profits, now publicly praised Sundar's leadership and contributed millions to the effort. Internal doubts, yet despite the progress, Sundar himself struggled behind closed doors. Late one evening at Google's headquarters, he sat alone in his office, scrolling through emails from struggling veterans. Some were heartbreaking, some angry, some desperate. No matter how much progress they made, the need seemed endless. Had he bitten off more than he could handle? He missed the simplicity of coding days, problems that could be solved with clean lines of logic. But homelessness was messy, human, and stubbornly complex. A crisis emerges as momentum grew. So did opposition. Certain political factions, skeptical of large tech companies' involvement in social programs, began accusing Sundar of using homelessness for corporate image laundering. Media debates grew heated. Why should a billionaire tech executive dictate national policy? One anchor shouted on live television. Protesters gathered outside Google's offices. Lawsuits were threatened. Bureaucratic red tape re-emerged in Washington, slowing down funding and creating frustrating delays. The emotional toll on Sundar and his team was enormous. Emily confronts the noise. When the backlash reached its peak, Emily requested an emergency meeting with Sundar. They sat once again beneath the same cherry tree that had become their unofficial meeting place. "You didn't ask for any of this, Emily," Sundar sighed. "You've been pulled into something enormous." Emily shook her head firmly. "No, Sundar. We stepped into this together. You sat on that bench because you cared. Don't forget that." She looked him in the eye, her voice steady. There's always resistance to change, but real leadership isn't about popularity, it's about persistence. Sundar leaned back, breathing deeply. I just didn't expect the personal attacks. Neither did I, Emily admitted. But you know what? Every time I walk into a facility and see one less soldier sleeping on the street, it's worth it. A new ally in an unexpected turn, an unlikely supporter stepped forward. Retired four-star General Michael Davenport, a decorated military leader respected by both political parties. General Davenport had quietly been following the progress of Project Second Wind. When he saw the rising attacks, he called Sundar personally. Mr. Pichai, our soldiers fought for this country. They deserve better than red tape and talking points. If you'll have me, I'd like to join your task force. His involvement shifted the public narrative almost overnight. The critics lost steam as a new coalition of veterans, both liberal and conservative, began publicly backing the program. The recommitment. With renewed energy, Sundar and Emily spearheaded Phase 2 of Project Second Wind, expansion into rural communities, often neglected in national programs, mobile units delivering healthcare and job training directly to tent cities, partnerships with universities to develop trauma-informed curricula for first responders. Emily became the national spokesperson for the campaign. Her speeches grew bolder, her confidence stronger. Homelessness isn't a crisis of housing, she told Congress during a nationally televised hearing. It's a crisis of human connection, and we are finally reconnecting. Her words became one of the most shared quotes of the year. The human cost, never forgotten, but behind every victory, Emily never forgot the faces of those still on the streets. 1. Cold morning while visiting a new center in Chicago, she noticed an older woman sitting on a bench outside the facility, huddled in a thin blanket, shivering. Emily walked over and sat beside her. Cold morning, huh? Emily said gently. The woman looked at her suspiciously but nodded. What's your name? Emily asked. Sandra. Emily smiled warmly. Sandra, would you like to come inside? We've got coffee and warm beds. Sandra hesitated but finally nodded, and as Emily helped her inside, she whispered quietly to herself, one more saved. Healing in the shadows. The cost of caring months passed since Emily had first sat on that cold street corner where Sundar found her. Her life was unrecognizable now. A published author, national speaker, advocate, and advisor to the very task, force reshaping America's response to homelessness. But behind the progress, Emily quietly battled her most persistent opponent, her own mind. The demands of leadership were overwhelming. Every time she spoke at an event or met a new homeless veteran, memories resurfaced. The empty nights on park benches, the helplessness of losing her husband, the guilt of leaving her sister behind for years. Though she smiled publicly, the internal wounds still pulsed. Rebecca's intervention. One morning, Rebecca, her longtime counselor, gently intervened. Emily, you've carried this movement on your shoulders, but even healers need healing. Emily sat silently, staring at her. Cup of tea. I thought if I kept working, it would silence the memories. Rebecca shook her head. Survival and healing aren't the same. Rebecca proposed a temporary break, a retreat far from the cameras, interviews, and boardrooms. You need rest, Emily, not to quit, but to refill your well. Emily hesitated but finally agreed. A cabin in Montana. With Sundar's help, a small private retreat was arranged in rural Montana, away from reporters, away from Washington, and away from the city lights. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to breathe. She hiked through pine forests, sat quietly by lakes, journaled under starry skies. Let the silence become her therapy. Sundar's quiet visit one crisp evening. Sundar surprised her with a visit, flying quietly to Montana to check in, not as a CEO but as a friend. They sat by a crackling fire beneath a canopy of stars. I didn't want you to think I abandoned the fight, Emily said softly. You haven't, Sundar assured her. You're simply learning balance. That may be the hardest lesson of all. They spoke for hours about life, loss, and purpose. Sundar shared his own struggles, how the movement had reshaped his views on leadership, empathy, and what success truly meant. Technology solves problems, Sundar said, but humanity heals wounds. Emily smiled. And sometimes humanity needs quiet nights like this. A letter from Sandra during her retreat. Emily received a letter that moved her to tears. It was from Sandra, the woman she had helped outside the Chicago facility months ago. Dear Emily, I'm safe now. For the first time in years, I sleep indoors. I've started working part-time and I'm reconnecting with my children. Thank you for seeing me when I thought I was invisible. You saved my life. Forever grateful, Sandra. The letter reminded Emily why the fight was worth every ounce of pain. A promise renewed. When Emily returned from Montana, she was different. Not weaker, but lighter. Her speeches carried new depth. Her advocacy sharpened. She now spoke not only of policy but of personal renewal. At her first event back, she closed with words that silenced the crowd. We fight homelessness not just to put people in homes, but to return their dignity. And dignity is restored when we allow people not just to survive but to heal. The national shift her return marked a pivotal moment for Project Second Wind. Congress passed the Veterans Dignity Act, funneling unprecedented resources into trauma-informed care. Universities added new research centers dedicated to studying long-term homelessness solutions. Emily and Sundar were both nominated for the Presidential Medal of Freedom for their groundbreaking work. But for Emily, her greatest victory was quieter. She was finally at peace with herself. Full circle, the White House ceremony. It was a cool spring morning in Washington, D.C. The White House South Lawn buzzed with energy as a small, exclusive audience gathered for the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony. Reporters whispered, cameras rolled, and dignitaries waited as Sundar Pichai and Emily Harper stood side by side. Neither had ever imagined they would be here, certainly not together. The president stepped forward, his voice resonant. Today we honor two Americans who turned an encounter on a city street into a national movement that has changed thousands of lives. The crowd erupted into applause. As the medal was draped around Emily's neck, her eyes filled with quiet tears, not for the honor but for what it represented. Redemption, not only for herself but for every homeless veteran who once felt invisible. Private gratitude. After the ceremony, Sundar and Emily shared a quiet moment in the rose garden. You've come so far, Sundar said, smiling. Emily chuckled softly. I wouldn't have made it here without your bench. Sundar shook his head. No, Emily. I sat down, but you stood up. They both laughed gently, fully understanding the depth beneath those words. Unexpected opportunity. Shortly after the ceremony, Emily received an unexpected offer. A teaching position at a prestigious university to develop a program on trauma, resilience, and public service. Initially hesitant, Emily pondered it for days. She worried about leaving frontline advocacy work. She called Sundar for advice. You've given your voice to thousands already, Sundar said. Now you can train thousands more to carry that voice forward. Emily smiled. It's not stepping away, is it? It's planting more seeds. The first lecture months later, in her first packed lecture hall, Emily stood confidently behind the podium. Her students, many future social workers, counselors, and policymakers, listened intently. Before we talk about policy, Emily began, we talk about people. No statistic ever cried on a park bench. Real change begins with real stories. Her voice was steady, calm, but powerful. At the back of the room, Sundar sat quietly, watching with quiet pride. This, he realized, was legacy, not in headlines or medals, but in minds forever changed. The silent victory. By the end of that year, national veteran homelessness dropped to historic lows. Project Second Wind was adopted by other nations. Former homeless veterans became leaders, counselors, and advocates. A movement born on a street corner had evolved into a global model for compassion-driven reform. Yet for Emily and Sundar, The greatest success wasn't numbers. It was the unseen lives quietly rebuilt in small apartments, warm shelters, and family homes. The legacy lives on 5 years later. The world had changed. It had been 5 years since that cold San Francisco morning when Sundar Pichai paused on the sidewalk and spoke to Emily Harper. That brief encounter, so ordinary at first glance, had rippled outward into something extraordinary. Project Second Wind had expanded globally. Over 800,000 veterans and homeless individuals had received permanent housing, employment, therapy, and second chances. The world now studied the Pichai-Harper model as a case study in how empathy could reshape public policy. And yet for both Emily and Sundar, the work was never truly finished. An international invitation. One morning, Sundar received an invitation from the United Nations. The Secretary General had followed the success of Project Second Wind with admiration and requested Sundar and Emily to speak at the Global Humanitarian Summit in Geneva. The theme, the future of compassionate leadership. Both accepted without hesitation. The journey to Geneva as their private jet crossed the Atlantic. Emily stared out the window at the endless sky, reflecting on the unlikely road behind her. "Do you ever think about how close this almost never happened?" she asked Sundar quietly. Sundar smiled, glancing at his old friend. "Every day. You could have kept walking. You could have refused help." They both shared a knowing look. Their paths had converged by choice, not luck. The global stage. The conference was packed with world leaders, CEOs, policymakers, and advocates from every corner of the globe. The audience hung on every word as Sundar took the stage first. "Technology can solve complex equations, but compassion solves human suffering," he said. "The future of leadership must balance innovation with empathy. The data will never tell you someone's pain, only conversation will." Then Emily stepped up, now confident on the grandest stages. "I was invisible. Not because I didn't exist, but because people chose not to see me," she began. "Homelessness isn't a financial problem, it's a failure of human connection. We broke that pattern, not with money, but with a conversation on a bench." Her speech earned a rare standing ovation that lasted several minutes. The private meeting. After the summit, world leaders approached Sundar and Emily privately. The Prime Minister of Japan requested help adapting the model for aging homeless populations. European ministers asked to launch similar trauma-informed veteran care centers. Several African nations sought technical guidance to prevent youth homelessness. For the first time, global powers weren't just offering charity, they were committing to systemic compassion. A quiet evening. That night, Sundar and Emily sat on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, the moon reflecting softly on the water. Sundar broke the silence. "Do you realize we've likely helped more people than we'll ever meet?" Emily nodded slowly. "It's strange, isn't it? You never meet most of the people you save. But we saved one. That was enough to start." They both smiled, savoring the quiet moment, knowing full well that their shared journey was far from over. A personal chapter reopens. Not long after their return home, Emily received news that would open a long-sealed chapter of her life. Her estranged sister Megan, who had long since forgiven Emily, was getting married. She wanted Emily, fully healed and whole, to stand by her side as maid of honor. At the wedding, Emily watched as generations of family members who once thought she was lost forever now embraced her tightly. Her nephews and nieces saw her not as the homeless one, but as their heroic Aunt Emily, author, advocate, and healer. A new generation of leaders as Project Second Wind continued to thrive. Something even more inspiring began to unfold. The people once rescued were now leading. Former homeless veterans were running regional offices. Trauma survivors became licensed counselors. Emily's students from her university program graduated and filled government positions, continuing the movement far beyond her reach. The model had evolved from a rescue mission into a self-sustaining engine of healing. Emily's final public speech. Years later, as Emily prepared to retire from public advocacy, she delivered her final keynote address, not to politicians or CEOs, but to thousands of social work graduates at her university. Her voice was softer, but carried a deeper weight now. When Sundar sat down on that bench with me, he didn't see a problem. He saw a person, and that choice changed everything. You'll face broken systems, you'll encounter people society has given up on, but don't let the complexity overwhelm you. Sometimes all it takes is one conversation. Compassion doesn't scale like technology. It scales one human being at a time. Her words echoed in the hall like a sacred reminder. The closing bench. Years later, a simple bench was installed in the very spot where Sundar and Emily first met. A quiet memorial. A small, bronze plaque read, "Here sat two strangers who chose not to walk past each other," and the world was changed. Every year on that anniversary, Sundar would visit the bench quietly, sometimes alone, sometimes with his family, always pausing to remember that even in a world dominated by machines, algorithms, and data, the greatest transformations still begin with one human moment.